Hello, I'm going to just do a little short video here this morning in relation to arterial line waveform interpretation. I'm not going to go through what is an arterial line, how it's put in, contraindications in relation to relative contraindications, how it's actually done, what the components of the art line itself and everything is. What I'm going to do is just briefly go through what is a waveform, what is made up within that waveform, and how we actually read it. So, in relation to the arterial line and its waveform itself. So, there's 6 components that we want to look for when we actually see it. So they are the systolic upstroke, the peak systolic pressure, the systolic decline, the dichrotic notch, the diastolic runoff, and then the end diastolic pressure. So what are these things? So once a waveform is set up and it's connected onto the monitoring system itself. So what we're looking at firstly is the systolic upstroke. So that is the ventricular ejection from the aortic valve. So as that goes up, we're looking then at, once we get up here to the peak systolic pressure. So that's the maximum pressure in the central arteries itself. As it starts to come down, we're then looking and we come on our way down, so we're getting to the systolic decline. So that is a rapid decline in the arterial pressure. And then we get to this funny little notch that's here. So this is the dichrotic notch. And what that is when we're coming down in the systolic decline, when the aortic valve closes and no blood then is passing, we get a slight increase in pressure, which gives us that tiny little notch. And then from there, we then go into the diastolic runoff, which leads down here. So the diastolic runoff is the drop in the pressure after the aortic valve is closed and the rest of the blood is draining into the peripheral circulation. And then finally, the end diastolic pressure at the bottom of the curve here is the pressure exerted back onto the aorta at the end of the contraction, and then we start back up again and we'll go back up into our systolic upstroke again. So that is the main components of what an actual waveform is. So we can look at it and go, okay, there's 2 phases to the actual waveform itself that we're looking at. So it's almost sort of down the middle. As I said, we've got 6 components there. So the first phase that we have is the anchronoc limb. And this is the systolic upstroke, the peak systolic pressure, the diastolic decline, and just part or half of where the dichrotic notch is. And then from there, the second phase that we're looking at is the dichrotic limb, which is the second half of the notch, as we then go down into the diastolic runoff and then the end diastolic pressure before we go back up again. So what does this all mean? So it's a pressure waveform, but once we have the art line itself connected, say, to the radial artery, so the pressure waveform indicates an invasive blood pressure compared to a non-invasive blood pressure, as in a manual BP cuff or one that is an NIBP that is attached to a monitor and such. This pressure itself in the waveform is a gradient which produces this impulse, which originates from the left ventricle, and then it moves through to the aortic valve and along the systemic arteries, and then it comes to the art line itself, and then that art line goes back into the monitor, where it goes through the components of the art line itself, and then into the monitor, and then it's how we get our readings as such. So, it's a very simple breakdown of what an art line waveform is. I could get into a lot more detail of how it's actually done. I could draw a diagram of what an actual art line looks like and what are the components and the transformer and everything that reads it, how you actually level it at 0 pressure for the atmosphere and so forth. But for the importance and for the simplicity of this video here, I just wanted to give you a good, simple overview of what an art line waveform would hopefully look like. And from there, I hope it's piqued your interest in some ways to go and have a look. And then from the art line itself, this is ideally what we're wanting to see, but from there, depending on if there is a leak, there's a block within the actual system itself, is how the actual waveform will change. And that's my challenge to you, is to actually go and have a look at some variances in waveforms and see what you come up with. Thanks for your time. I hope you enjoyed this series that I've produced tonight for APS 505, and look forward to seeing you out there on the road at some stage. Thanks a lot.